Welcome back to State of the Union. You just heard from the GOP vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance. Here with me now to respond is former presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg, a Navy veteran. Thank you so much for being here. You heard me ask J.D. Vance about his attacks on Tim Walz's military record. I want to replay part of what he said about that.
I'm not criticizing Tim Walz's service. I'm criticizing the fact that he lied about his service for political gain, Dana. Now, I served in the United States Marine Corps, and you know this. And look, there are a lot of things that I'm proud about. I've never lied about what I did or overstated it because it would be beneficial to me in an election. I think that's what Tim Walz did. That's what I was criticizing. And yes, I do think it's scandalous behavior.
Now, the Harris campaign says Walz misspoke when he said he carried weapons of war. You heard me mention that to the senator. You served in the military. You deployed to Afghanistan. Does Senator Vance have a point when he said that we should hear more from Governor Walz himself or even Vice President Harris to correct the record there?
No, he doesn't. And the fact that a veteran wants to go out and disparage another veteran just goes against certainly everything I learned during my time in service. Look, I think in many ways it's the exception that proves the rule. If the only thing that they can find about Tim Walz to complain about is to disparage his military record that was clearly honorable. Remember, you can retire at 20 years. Tim Walz served for 24. And the fact that they have to go back to find a clip from 2018 to find the one time that he slipped up when he talks about the weapons of war that he carried and said something instead about carrying a weapon in war, it's kind of an exception that proves the rule in terms of how hard you have to look to find Tim Walz saying anything that isn't precise and accurate. But there's something, I think, much bigger at play here, which is I watched that interview and watched J.D. Vance present himself as suddenly very particular about precision in speech and very concerned about honesty. He's running with Donald Trump, somebody who has set records for lying in public life. He just gave a press conference where fact checkers estimate that he told 162 distortions or lies. That frankly, is just impressive in terms of being able to physically do that. It's like the Olympics of lying. So maybe just because it's Sunday morning, I can't stop thinking about the scripture that says, how can you look at your brother and say, let me take the speck out of your eye when you have a plank in your own eye?
I want to ask about something else that J.D. Vance and I spoke about, and that is the fact that you were among the Democrats that Vance had previously criticized as being childless cat ladies. I asked him about that. Take a listen.
You called out Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg in particular. Kamala Harris has 2 stepchildren. Pete Buttigieg and his husband have adopted twins. Do you recognize them as parents and more broadly as being part of families?
Well, of course I do, Dana. I never, Dana, criticize people for not having kids. I criticize people for being anti-child.
What's your response to that?
Well, but I don't know which part of that is worse. The lie that he just told when he says he never criticized people for not having kids, because of course he very much did, including Kamala Harris and me and a lot of other people, millions of Americans, in fact, who he disparaged as childless cat ladies. And look, I'm a dog guy with 2 kids, but I'm one of millions of Americans he managed to insult there. But then the other part, just as troubling, right, which is saying that anybody who disagrees with him is anti-child. And it's part of just who he is, right? He seems incapable of talking about a vision for this country in terms of lifting people up or building people up or helping people out. It's always disparagement, disparaging a fellow veteran's military service. I'm pretty sure I caught in your interview him attacking Tim Walz for his how he greeted his own wife. After speaking, and now, not saying we have a disagreement about policy, some reason why his ideas are better than our ideas for taking care of kids, but rather, if you disagree with him, if you disagree with J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, and Republicans' agenda to dismantle the Department of Education or any of the other things they're proposing to do, you're not just disagreeing, you're anti-child. This is exactly the kind of politics that people are sick of. I think it's why people feel a sense of exhaustion when they look back to what the Trump era was like and have very little interest and appetite in going back to that politics of disparagement and destruction and insult, when right now you have this incredible amount of joy and lift surrounding the Harris-Walz campaign that's part of what accounts for the extraordinary momentum that we're seeing as they tour the country.
What about this notion, beyond the disparaging remarks that what you say are disparaging remarks about the childless cat ladies, which we all heard, about the policies, about the fact that and this is something that he has been sort of entrenched in for several years, this sort of new conservative notion that your policies, your fellow Democrats' policies, don't contribute to the pursuit of family in this country?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. We're the ones trying to get the child tax credit expanded, and J.D. Vance couldn't be bothered to show up in the Senate and vote for it, and Republicans have blocked that from being expanded, or it would be the law of the land right now. So if you want to talk about promoting children, promoting family, put your money where your mouth is. Same with a lot of other policies, like, I don't know, paid family leave, something that Tim Walz delivered in Minnesota, something that the Biden-Harris administration sought to deliver for the American people. Right now, Republicans are blocking it, but that's something that they could certainly change their tune on, but they haven't. Project 2025 is full of things that, in my opinion, are bad for families. And look, when you asked him and pressed him on whether my family was legitimate, he said yes, because I think he kind of felt shamed into it. But let's remember also that last time I checked, he doesn't even think I should legally be able to have a family. Now, if he really got his way in his anti-marriage equality views, I don't know if that means that he would want me and my husband to be forcibly divorced and separated from our children, or if he'd be satisfied just to have us lose legal protections like the ability to do our taxes together or visit them in a hospital. I don't know exactly what his vision of us not having a family looks like, but I know that it's not pro-family for me.
Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much for being here this morning, and happy birthday to your twins.